Well, it's all been leading up to this. Finally, guys, welcome back to this tournament after action report featuring me, Joshua Joshi Howard, and you can kind of see this is my roommate's cat, Oscar. He's hanging out here. You'll get to see him a little bit throughout the course of the video. We're going to be talking about the California Team Championships event that I just went to this last weekend, and oh boy, was it a lot of fun. Hi. Before we get into the games, we want to give out our traditional thank yous as well. Of course, thank you to Dice Hammer for hosting this massive event. We had 38 teams for 190 players participating in it. By far the largest Warhammer event that I've been to so far in my, we'll say brief career as a player. And also the first teams event that I've ever gone to. So it was a ton of fun. Thank you to Dice Hammer and their judges for helping to put on this event. He's now sitting on my lap. There he is. I also want to say thank you to the host for this event, the Embassy Suites in Anaheim. It actually turned out to be right next to where I used to live a couple of years ago, back in like 2017, which was very funny when I realized that that was going on. But also the sponsors for the event. I know Squad Marks participated. XPZ helped bring terrain, and I'm sure there's a couple others whose names I cannot find on the event pack. Also want to give a big thank you to GitHammer, who was the umbrella organization under which I was playing this last weekend. I played with the GitHammer Git posers, and if it was not for them, I probably would not have participated in this because they were the ones to ask me if I was interested. And of course, at the time, I was like, absolutely. I've heard so many good things about playing in teams events. Let's make sure I can go to this one. So before we start talking about the actual event itself, I do want to give a brief overview of how I got involved in this because I've been talking about it for a long time. If you've been watching the other videos, you know that I have been preparing and playing basically the same list for the past 3 or 4 events in order to make sure I felt ready for this event. But basically what happened was the RTT that I went to called New Year New Wa, I believe it was my second video that I ended up putting up. I played up against Sage and his Drukhari at the time, and I told him, because I saw that there was a ton of people all wearing the Gatehammer Hawaiian shirts, which I'll post at some point. They might also be the thumbnail. He told me about the team event that they were going to, and I said, hey, if you're needing an extra person, don't hesitate. Reach out to me. Let me know. I'd love to play on any team that'll have me, just to get some experience with it. And later on, a couple weeks later, he asked me, hey, do you want to join the team? And he put me on a team with our captain, Luis, Sage, Evan, who I also played at that event, who was playing the Votan, who had the worst turn one of any player I've ever seen, and then Ryan. And we ended up putting together a team. Both Luis and I were guard players, and so ha ha ha, I kicked Luis off of his favorite army because I only have one, unfortunately, and he had multiple that he was able to switch to, and he ended up choosing to play Death Guard. We also had Sage at some point. I don't know how much of it was his idea versus how much of it he just wanted to do it. I know him mostly as a Drukhari player, but he also chose to switch to Custodes. And then our last two players were Evan, who is playing Votan, and Ryan, who I hadn't met before, who is a Blood Angels player. So, with all this in mind, we knew going into this that we were going to play as a squad. We had all of our different things going through, and going into the event, I pretty exhaustively track how many players are going to every event, how strong they tend to be looking, as well as what I expect them to play. And looking at it, I knew just at the outset that our team was probably not going to be likely to make it to the top tables. I remember Sage told me at the end of the event, hey, as long as our placing starts with something better than a 3, he's happy with how we performed at the event. So, basically everybody knew that we were not going to be one of the best teams, but we were going to go there, we were going to have a good time. And then Luis also was very much of the opinion, like, hey, we're going to sack my matchup, we're going to sack Ryan's matchup, and then Sage, Evan, and me, are going to be trying to get all of our points. We'll talk about how that ended up shaking out to, how I did throughout the rest of the event. But with all that in mind, let's start talking a little bit about the lay of the land at this event. So it's important to note that at this event, every pairing would have 4 different kinds of tables. You would have one Games Workshop terrain. I don't remember what layouts they were. I never played on a single one of them. There was a Squad Marks terrain, which would have a fixed center. You would have basically 2 small L's surrounding the center no man's land objective that would basically prevent anything from either of your deployment zones easily being able to shoot onto the center objective. And then I had a couple other small pieces. Then there were 2 Dice Hammer terrain sets, which both players had an L shape as well as a wall and a woods that I believe counted as obscuring. I believe it was a bit of an interesting set. There were two of those, and then lastly, there was what was called the light terrain. And I have to say, this was the lightest terrain. I know people who watch this who don't play player place terrain already look at player place terrain and say, that doesn't look like a lot of terrain. It feels like there's a lot of shooting angles. Let me tell you that the light terrain was the lightest terrain of anything I had ever seen. You had one L piece, which was probably about that big, and then we go to like that, and it had open windows. If you were touching that piece of terrain, you could be seen from the other side. It did not matter if you were on the first floor. It had no obscuring. There's also a ruin, which was about that big, and it had a wall that was like here, and it was short. Like if you were touching that, you were going to be seen. They also gave you one wall, which was about that long and about that tall. So you could hide most things behind it, like most tanks would hide behind it, but a lot of battle suits would struggle to hide behind it. Um, and that one counted it as a ruin, so it was obscuring. And then you also had one woods piece, which is pretty big. It's probably about like that big, but that was it. Basically, if you were playing on the light terrain, it was going to be a shooting gallery for both sides. Like everybody was going to be able to see everything, and the only real way to hide was behind the really big L piece, and that was it. So it was a very entertaining board to play on, and we'll talk about the different tables I ended up playing on throughout the course of the event. As to how strong the event was and how many players were there were 190 players going to this event. Of those, the ones that are probably the most recognizable to everybody who's watching, we had Ben Urich, Junior, I'm going to say this wrong, Afyehi? I'm not sure how to say that. Junior Aflehi, Chase Chappell, Jason McKenzie, Arthur Tu, Alex Spethopoulos, Matt Geyer, Grant Kaufman, and a number of other players who have, done quite well locally. I know Kyle Perry did well at LVO, and Ken on Yabor did well at LVO. Joel Wilson, another major killer, and there are too many here to name, so I'm going to stop there before I make someone feel bad. But there's a lot of very strong players. However, the 190 players, it absolutely ran the gamut. There were basically players of every skill level you could think of, but with 190, or nearly 100 of them had capped out the number of games that they had played in their ITC 2023 season. Which, again, going to give the same caveat as always, ITC has not been updated since LVO. A lot of people tell me they don't care, but until I have a better way to track what people are playing that doesn't rely on them only going to GTs, it is the resource that I have. So we're going to continue talking about it. But anyway, lots of very strong players here, lots of people at this event that you are expecting to do very, very well. And of course, Ben Urich, the number 4 ranked ITC player in the 2023 season. That said, basically, how strong your opponents are is largely going to depend on how strong you are doing, right? Because with so many different teams, so many different players, it's going to depend a lot on how well your team is doing to see what you're going to be pairing up against. Let's go ahead and talk about the list that I brought to this event. Now, if you've been watching the previous videos, you know that this is the same list that I've been bringing to the last couple of events, and it's the same because I've been practicing for this event by taking the list to a variety of different things and hoping to pair it into a variety of different matchups. The core theory behind this list, I'll talk about it a little bit more in depth today, at least in this regard, is that I am going to stat check most armies. My army has a bunch of models with 4-up invuls and other ways to improve their resilience. And everything that doesn't have an invul somewhere in the unit does have the ability to come back. And that's almost the entire army, right? If it doesn't have a 4+ invul, it's going to be coming back with the reinforcement stratagem. So to go over the actual list, I'm going to start with the stat check part of the army first, and then we can go over the supporting pieces to make it work. The core of the list is 3 units of 6 Bullgryn, and Bullgryn are toughness 6, 4-up normal save, 4-up invul save, 6-up feel no pain, damage -1 with 3 wounds apiece. Now, the damage -1 is really nice because it means that most weapons are not very effective against it. They either don't have the volume or they don't have the strength to wound consistently. And the damage -1 means that things like plasma guns, which are normally damage 2, are now damage 1. You don't want to overcharge them. which means that you're not going to take hazardous checks, but they're supposed to be good at killing elite infantry. The other part of it is because they have the 4-up invul, even things like your las cannons are going to be, I'm going to be saving them on 4s. The things that are winning on 2s, I'm still saving them on 4s, which makes them very hard to remove. Because I have 6 of these bodies, it becomes very convenient. There are not a lot of units that will consistently take out Bullgryn, a unit of 6 Bullgryn in one turn. The ones that I have found that can do it are a unit of Trajan with Wardens, because they ignore modifiers, and they barely, like, it's about a 50-50 on if they kill the 6 Bullgryn or not, and big units of Crisis Suits with Cyclic Ions, and Hellblasters if anyone's playing the weird Lieutenant combo that my buddy Steve loves to play. But because of this, I can put them very aggressively, and I basically plan from the beginning of the game with 3 Bullgryn. These 2 are going to sit on the center objective and either the northwest or the southeast objective, and one of them is pointed directly at my opponent's home objective. And about half my games, they get there, which is really ridiculous considering that they are just running it up the board. The other major part of the stat check that comes in this army is the Stormsword. It's a 495-point model with 4 las cannons, 5 twin-linked heavy bolters, and the main gun, which is a concussion cannon or something. It's just a killing machine. If your army cannot kill the Stormsword in one turn, and they try and do it with shooting, the Stormsword will turn back and it'll kill 1.5 of basically everything. The main gun will kill basically anything that doesn't have an invul, basically for sure. The 4 las cannons will do serious damage into another vehicle or monster, and the 5 twin-linked heavy bolters will kill one chaff or do real damage into like a vehicle or monster, right? Just because it's hitting on 3s, sustained, and twin-linked. So even though it's oftentimes winning on 5s, you reroll them, so you're getting a fair number of hits, a fair number of saves that your opponent has to make. So those are the primary stat check pieces. The next piece that comes through, and what I would definitely not consider running this list without, is 3 units of Kasrkin. There are 2 units with double melted, double plasma, 1 unit with double plasma, double volley gun, and they all are equipped with a Meltamine. I did some math on snipers, and because they're damage 3, they really suck. Like, I don't like them, but they're fine. You can take them. The big thing about this is, 1, they are incredibly self-sufficient, and 2, you can reinforce them for 2 CP, and you're always going to have them. And Kasrkin are incredibly flexible. They give themselves an order, and if you ever need to, you can have someone else in the army, like Gaunt's Ghost or a platoon command squad, or even Lord Solar sometimes if you need him to. Also, Colonel Straken can give them an order to make them do something better. And they can move 9 inches. They can get BOC2. They can shoot a little bit better. They can also shoot a little bit better a different way. They can be better in melee, and they can be more durable. And so they're incredibly flexible. Now, the important thing that CTC ruled that Kasrkin can give themselves an order and receive the same order. So they can move 12 inches if they receive move, move, move twice, which is huge. 12 inches is how most bikes move. And they're infantry, so they ignore walls. The other big thing about Kasrkin is they have 2 abilities that work out incredibly well in conjunction. The first one is Meltamine. The Meltamine model gets within 3 inches of anything at the beginning of any phase once per game. You can chuck a Meltamine on it. On a 2+, it takes D3 mortal wounds, or 2D3 if it's a vehicle. Now, the second one is the Grenade Stratagem. For 1 CP, you roll 6 dice, and for every 4+ you roll, the target takes a mortal wound. Both of these things do not require you to be eligible to shoot, meaning that you can move 12, and then grenade and Meltamine something for an average of 5 mortal wounds against most targets and 7 mortal wounds against vehicles, which is ludicrous, right? The fact that you can just do that and run up and deal 5 mortal wounds to a Catachan, great stuff. And that's without firing a single shot. The other thing that's really nice is they are very flexible, right? Most things that you bring in from Strategic Reserve in the Guard will move 6 and then they can advance, but Kasrkin will move 9 and then they can advance. So they are incredibly versatile on the board. I would strongly recommend listening to David Gaylord and Vic Vijay's podcast, Fireside, for a bit more on how he uses Kasrkin, because he's better than I am. After that, it was mostly just finding support pieces to make sure the army worked. I took a couple of scoring units in Gaunt's Ghosts, 1 unit of 5 Tempestus Scions, a Cyclops demolition vehicle, and a Callidus. And so between these 4 units, I can basically be almost anywhere I want on the map and score secondaries really effectively with them. Also, the Callidus has effect, which is very nice. And if I don't have anything to do with Gaunt's Ghost, if I don't have a secondary that they need to do, I can just plop them on top of a 6-inch ruin, get plunging fire, and have an AP2 autocannon that I can just shoot out. They also have a sniper, so it's okay for it's a damage 4 sniper, so it's okay at like trying to pick off characters. If it doesn't happen, darn. If it does, cool. Then, the only thing that can order Bullgryn and the Stormsword is Lord Solar. So Lord Solar is absolutely required for this kind of list. Uh, and then in order to make Lord Solar work, you need to bring a platoon command squad and an infantry squad. I gave both of them mortars. You could do it with Cadians, but I don't know why you'd spend the extra points on the Cadian command squad. But these mortars are okay. They are decent for picking up chaff. They can, ping off a couple of wounds here and there on heavier things. So, they exist. Um, but it's important to note that you cannot use Fields of Fire to improve the damage from a Stormsword because the Stormsword does not have the Squadron keyword, which is required for Fields of Fire to work. We also had a Regimental Enginseer to make the Stormsword more difficult to kill because it heals D3 per turn. It has a 4-up invul basically the entire game as long as I can get it off on turn 1. The last piece is Catachan Jungle Fighters with a unit of 20 of them with Colonel Straken. This unit is really nice for just running up the board and move blocking and charging things, and it'll actually do decent damage into most things just because Colonel Straken's hitting on 2s, wounding a lot of things on all infantry on 3s, and then also wounding most vehicles on 5s, and he's re-rolling all of that with lethal hits. So he just does damage. He also has Anti-Monster 4-up. It doesn't come up very often, but it is cool. And the Catachan Jungle Fighters just are obnoxious because they're OC2 bodies. You put them on an objective, and your opponent is going to struggle to take it back from you. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and finally start talking about the first round that we got into. So round 1 was a little bit interesting. The game started at 9:30, and in round 1, me and the Git posers end up pairing into the SEAL Team Ripper Swarms. Now, you all recognize several of these names from the last video that I uploaded when I went to the Gamers Haven RTT. Because SEAL Team Ripper Swarms was made up of Shane and his Raven Guard Space Marines, a Vanguard Space Marines detachment, Rick and his Death Guard, Toby and his Eldar, Camden and his Canoptic Court Necrons, and Ian and his Orcs. Now, the interesting thing about this matchup is that both Rick and Ian were coming in from a decent ways away, and they had a flat tire on their way in, meaning that they were not around at the beginning of the match. And so we ended up pairing off relatively early. I don't remember exactly how our pairings went, but what we ended up pairing into was we put Evan and his Votan against Shane and his Vanguard Space Marines. I was paired into Rick and his Death Guard. Luis was paired into Toby and his Eldar. Sage and his Custodians was paired into Camden and his Necrons, and Ryan and his Blood Angels were paired into Ian and his Orcs. Now, because Rick and Ian were so delayed, basically what their captain told me was, hey, we're going to basically just say throughout the course of this, you guys are going to be playing, and if they get here in a reasonable time, we'll set up the game and go from there, but if they don't show up in time, we'll just forfeit effectively these 2 tables. And so that's important because I ended up going up against Rick, who was not there, and Ryan ended up going up against Ian, who was not there. Meanwhile, we had Evan, Luis, and Sage playing up against Shane, Toby, and Camden, respectively. Now, I was a little disappointed that I didn't get to play in round 1. I came there, I was planning to play 5 games throughout the course of the event, and it meant that I was only going to be able to play 4. But nobody said this. I just want to say, for Camden, Shane, and Toby, I know at least Shane and Camden watched the last video where I played up against them. I suspect that they intentionally paired me into someone who is not there because having played against Shane and Camden at the last event, I think it's like a 14-6 win into Shane with the exact same list, and I think it would have been an 11-9 loss to Camden. And he was playing admittedly a very different list, but he was playing Necron, so I don't have a great matchup into. But I think they kind of knew that if they gave someone else on my team to forfeit, it would be very difficult. Now, the other thing to mention at this point is you needed 56 WTC points in your pairings in order to win a round. If you had anything between 55 and 45, it was a draw. And so, if they're already going to be down 40 points and you guys basically give me a draw, so let's just say I get 8 points and they win by a little bit, that just means that we need to get 8 points between our other two players in order for us to actually find a win. That said, I ended up not spending a lot of time at my team's tables because one, I'm not permitted to like interfere with the games. The only thing I can really do is I can come up and be like asking like, "Hey, how is this game going? Are you guys winning? Are you losing? What kind of score are you expecting to get?" And I ended up going around because the Get Hammers guys ended up bringing 4 teams across the entire event. So I went out with Ryan and we just kind of tracked and looked at how all of our other buddies were doing across the rest of the event. Um, anyway, I come back at that one. I come back after doing one circuit and I set up the board with the objective markers and get my stuff a little bit ready in case Rick does show up. And um, from that point, again, I just do a couple more circuits. Probably should have taken more pictures than I actually did. But when I came back, I started realizing very quickly that the pairings that the Ripper Squirms had come up with Shane, Toby, and Camden were working out really well in their favor. Yes, I ended up getting a 20-0, and Ryan ended up getting a 20-0 because Rick and Ian showed up with I think about 45 minutes left in the round, basically not enough to have any real game. And when I talked to Rick, he ended up saying something to the effect of like, yeah, we showed up 2 hours late for the round, you deserve the win. And, it is what it is. Again, would have preferred to have rolled dice, but we'll take it. But what ended up happening is Shane did really well into Evan. I don't know. I don't know a lot about the game, so unfortunately I can't say anymore. But Shane ended up getting an 18-2 into Evan. Toby got a 19-1 into Luis, and Camden got a 14-6 into Sage. What you'll notice is between the 2, the 1, and the 6, we only scored 9 points on our tables, meaning that Shane, Toby, and Camden scored a combined 51 points to hold a draw in our round 1. And I will admit, I was simultaneously a little bit frustrated that with a 40-point head start, we couldn't pull out a win. But I was also very impressed because I knew that Shane and Camden, I have never seen Toby play, but I knew that Shane and Camden were, decently strong players. Camden is definitely stronger than I am. I only played Shane once, and I kind of blew him out, but I could tell that he knew what he was doing. He just had a really bad matchup, and they got the draw off of that one. So after that, I kind of settled in. I kind of knew what I was expecting for the rest of the event, and I went and paid $18 for a BLT from the hotel immediately after that. And I have to say, it was not worth $18. It was bread, bacon, lettuce, tomato. That was about it. Just and cheese. There was some cheese on it. But $18, man, I really, really should have gone across the street to Jack in the Box, especially if I had known I wasn't going to be playing round 1. But we end up talking through. I spend the time eating lunch with Sage and Evan, and kind of, asking them about how their matchups had gone. And Sage basically told me, he's like, yeah, I mean, I can't kill Necrons, or I can't kill Wraiths effectively. They just have 4-up invulns, 5-up Feel No Pains, res models. It takes so long for me to get through these models that it it's not worth it. I would prefer not to play in that matchup in the future. And Evan was talking about how he was really struggling with the fact that even though he puts out judgment tokens on different units for the +1 to hit and +1 to wound at the beginning of the game, it's counteracted really heavily by the Vanguard. If you're more than 12 inches away, I think it's 12, you have a -1 to hit against them, which is brutal for an army. If you go from hitting on 3s to hitting on 4s, it's a huge difference in the reliability that you have in the army. I didn't actually talk to Luis very much, but he was just saying that it was really tough for him to kind of do anything. And he was still learning the army because I believe that was his first game with Death Guard ever going into it. But with that, they get posers. We end up walking away from our first round with a draw against SEAL Team Ripper Swarms, which, based on how strong the SEAL Team Ripper Swarms were looking, I was happy with, ultimately. After that, though, we get back from lunch and we start playing into Team Ronin. And they had Brad and his Tyranids, Mike and his Imperial Knights, Nick and his Votan, Brandon and his Demons, and Nathan and his Custodes. And this was interesting because I noticed very quickly that three of them had the same last name. And it turns out that Brad, I believe, was the father of both Nick and Nathan, which was cool. I wish my dad had played like 40K with me. That would have been something cool to do. But it ended up going through. Again, I don't remember the pairings particularly well for or how the pairings worked out, but I know that in this one, I did get to play. I ended up pairing into Brad and his Tyranids. We had Evan play against Mike and his Knights, and Votan into Knights is a very hard winning matchup because you just put Judgment tokens on things, and then you just kill them. I mean, +1 to hit and +1 to wound means that his bolters are wounding Knights on 5s, which is crazy. You're just going to drown people in saves. We put Luis into Nick and his Votan. Ryan played his Blood Angels into Brandon's Demons, and Sage played his Custodes into Nathan's Custodes, which you'll find might be a bit of a pattern throughout the course of this event. Now, playing into Brad was interesting, because I have played into Tyranids twice recently. I played into Chris and his invasion fleet at the most recent RTT I went to, and I played into Steven, and his Tyranids at the GT, the Loaded Dice GT that I went to recently. And so I had a pretty good understanding of what most of the units of Tyranids do, right? I understand what the output of Exocrines are like. I understand what Maliceptors can do. I understand now what Gargoyles tend to do. And Brad was running a bit of a different list. Brad was still running an invasion fleet, but he was running a Neuro Tyrant with the Alien Cunning Enhancement, Old One Eye, 3 units of 10 Gargoyles, 1 Biovore, 2 Carnifexes with the Death Spitters, 3 Exocrines, only 1 Maliceptor, 2 Neurolictors, a Pyrovore, 1 Ripper Swarm, 2 units of Von Ryan's Leapers, and 2 units of 3 Zoanthropes. Now, I look at this list immediately and I recognize, there is nothing in this list that has shooting that is better than Strength 12. The Zoanthropes, which are probably the best range anti-tank that Brad has in this list, have 1 shot each with their focused, which fire a Warp Blast, but it's 1 shot each, hitting on a 3, Strength 12 with lethal hits. So it's a las cannon with lethal hits, which is not bad, but it's a 24-inch range, and it's going to be wounding. If it doesn't lethal hit my Stormsword, it's going to be lethal hitting me and wounding me on 5s. Now, going into the actual game, we end up playing this one on Dice Hammer terrain, which does have all those walls and L-shaped ruins across the board, and my very first drop for terrain ends up being that block, just the wall you see right in the middle of the board. And it counts as obscuring, but more than that, I put that there so that Brad could not put an obscuring piece of terrain on the middle objective. To make sure that I would be able to shoot him basically whatever he does if he wants to try and play for that. And my general rule whenever I play with a Stormsword or something similar is my goal is to set up terrain such that it will have complete firepower domination over my home objective and 2 objectives in no man's land. And after that, Brad ended up placing 2 pieces. And he placed both L-shaped ruins on the outside objectives on the northwest and the southeast. It's important to note that this one was played on Mission M, Purge the Foe, Chilling Rain, and Crucible of Battle. Now, Purge the Foe is normally a bit of a tough mission for me to play, just because my Kasrkin and my Catachan are relatively easy to pick up, and so it's very easy for most armies to be able to kill at least 1 unit per turn, and sometimes more than that, which means it's oftentimes rare that I'm killing more things than my opponent does on any given turn. Now, with all of this in mind, this game ends up being not particularly close. With all the terrain put down, I'm able to deploy incredibly aggressively with my Stormsword. The only thing that I end up doing is I end up deploying all of my Bullgryn on the line, as I am wont to do, with the main goal being that one unit of Bullgryn is going to go towards the northwest objective, one unit of Bullgryn is going to go towards the central objective, and one unit of Bullgryn is going to go towards, like I said, it's just going to shoot up the board towards my opponent's home objective. And I know the damage output of Exocrines and Maliceptors. Each one is going to kill one, maybe two Bullgryn per turn. And then I asked about the Leapers and like what kind of damage they do, and the Zoanthropes are also not going to be doing significant damage either. At the same time, I had planned to take the Catachan, and they were just going to hang out on the southeast objective and out OC my opponent. This was a tip I actually got from Jason McKenzie after playing at Gamers Haven. And it's just like, yeah, I shoot them off. I will go to my natural expansion, as I've heard some people call it, this time in the northwest, and then I'll just out OC my opponent on the southeast objective by just constantly putting guys on this objective. And with Catachan, I can easily put like 41 OC on the objective. Not a lot of armies can match that. And then once they die, I will replace them with Kasrkin that will hide behind a wall, waiting for their time to strike. With the terrain that Brad set up, he ended up setting up a situation where he put both of his walls in the middle to try and create a situation where he could hide some things, but it ended up not being particularly effective. And with his Von Ryan Leapers kind of arrayed across the middle of the board, this game ended up being very short. Now, if Brad had gone first, in my games against Tyranids really, really want to go first, because that's when they're going to take their gargoyles and shoot them across the no man's land. Move 12, advance, plus d6, shoot for, and then move another 6, so they will just lock you into deployment zone from the very beginning of the game. But Brad didn't go first. I went first. And that meant that he lost a ton of units. On turn 1, I was able to move the Stormsword into line, and I drew Assassination and Investigate Signals. Now, there are only 2 characters in my opponent's army, and they were the Nero Tyrant, who was safely hidden behind Obscuring, and Old One Eye, who, with his 2 Carnifex buddies, had tried to hide behind one of the walls in the middle. And in the picture that you still see Old One Eye on his home objective, but there are currently 2 Carnifexes missing. That's because I moved my Stormsword up and said, well, Assassination, I don't know if I can get, but I'll do my darndest to try and make it happen. I moved my Stormsword in such a spot that it could see the Carnifexes. I also moved my Bullgryn. They moved pretty aggressively up into the middle of the board. And I moved Kasrkin along the northwest in order to try and kill a Neurolictor that was hanging out. I don't remember if it was on or close to the northwest objective. And I ended up killing, on my first turn, both units of Von Ryan Leapers. One of them was on the center objective. One of them was on the northwest objective. I killed the Neurolictor off the northwest objective. I don't remember if my Catachan killed the other one off the southeast objective. I must have, because I don't see it on this board. I think that was where it had to have been. And I also killed a unit of Gargoyles that was kind of strung out, I believe. And the biggest thing that happened was I took my Stormsword and I unloaded it into the Carnifexes. And I ended up killing both Carnifexes dead. Now, luckily for Brad at this point, he still at least had Old One Eye, but the fact that Old One Eye is melee and the Death Spitters were gone meant that Old One Eye did not do a whole lot on his own. When Brad's turn came around, he didn't have a whole lot left. Because I killed off everything of his that was in the midboard, and everything after that was just going to struggle to hold my Bullgryn back, right? He had 2 Exocrine and a Maliceptor that were left, and all the Zoanthropes, but, like, they're not going to kill a unit of Kasrkin per turn. At least not one of them. Like, 2 of them can. And they're not going to kill a unit of Bullgryn per turn. Like, maybe if all of them had shot at 1 unit of Bullgryn, I might have lost 1 unit of Bullgryn per turn. So, it ended up being not particularly good for Brad, and he ended up drawing behind enemy lines and no prisoners. I believe he ended up scoring behind enemy lines because he drops a spore mine, but he shoots with some Exocrine, kills a couple Bullgryn, and that's about it. One of the things I ended up talking to Brad about, as you can see from the first photo, is he has a bunch of gargoyles behind that piece of woods, the gray thing that is touching his home objective, and it's crucial to note that in this Dice Hammer set, that piece of woods is obscuring, so they can't see. But I ended up talking to him about it later, and I don't think this was the best use of the gargoyles, because as he ended up talking about, they ended up road blocking themselves because they end up moving up between the two, bluish orange walls that he has on his side of the board, and they just clog themselves up. My turn two, I continue to do a ton of damage because I draw extend battle lines and engage on all fronts. Now, extend battle lines, super easy to do. I'm controlling all of the mid board. I control one and more. In fact, I believe I controlled 4 objectives on turn 2 because I controlled everything in No Man's Land and, of course, my home objective. And with the way that my Bullgryn were moving, I just had to continue marching them up the board. I gave them another order. They moved, and the unit that was more advanced in the board ended up getting in and tagging, I believe it was an Exocrine in melee. Additionally, my Stormsword killed the Maliceptor, and I believe killed an Exocrine or Zoanthropes. I don't remember. It killed something. The point is, the Stormsword killed 2 things every turn. Additionally, Colonel Straken and his Catachan moved off the southeast objective and tagged the unit of Zoanthropes off in the southeast and killed them all dead too. Or no, one of them lived on like a wound. And I think he eventually killed his way through the Catachan, but they also just came back immediately after. Oh yeah, that's what it was. Um, One of the important things, if you're playing into guard, is if you overwatch us during our movement phase, and we have the CP, and you kill one of our regiment units, we can immediately spend the 2 CP, and then the units come back immediately, because they go into strategic reserve, and because they're on the board, they move. Going into strategic reserve, if it's turn 2 or later, they come in the reinforcement step of the movement phase, meaning that it comes in the same phase that you just killed them. So if you see like 1 or 2 Catachan or 1 or 2 Kasrkin or something moving around, do not overwatch them because they will come back immediately. You will spend 1 CP and you will give me 100 points of models back. It is not worth it. Leave these units with like 1 or 2 guys at a time so that they are not effective. They have to take battle shock tests all the time, and they sometimes don't even get to do objectives. Anyway, uh, at this point, I also had my Bullgryn and Kasrkin move up along the northern part of the board. They killed an Exocrine between them, I believe, and the game was just kind of over at this point. Brad did take his turn 2, where he drew Defend Stronghold and Extend Battle Lines, but he didn't even score Defend Stronghold on turn 2 because on my turn 3, I was able to take it from him. Yeah, by the time you can see, there was just a full court press. He tried to do something a little bit cool with his gargoyles, where he dropped them um, where my Kasrkin had been staged previously, because I had left a hole there. And they did a little bit of damage to Gaunt's Ghost and killed a couple of normal infantry squad off of my home objective, but that was it. At the top of turn 3, Brad actually conceded because, as you can kind of see from this photo, I had a bunch of Bullgryn in his deployment zone already. I had the Stormsword firmly parked on the middle objective, and with OC8, I used it to charge like a single gargoyle. And I thought about tank shocking him, but I was like, nah. I mean, with 6 attacks hitting on 4, strength 8, I should kill this gargoyle anyway. So I ended up charging the Stormsword onto the middle objective, putting 8 OC there, and then all my Bullgryn were just completely corralling him into his own deployment zone. And that was basically it. That was my first game of the tournament. Uh, we didn't actually score out the rest of it because the game was over. Like, he did not have the things. He might kill a couple of units of infantry here and there and score a couple of primary points, but I'm going to be maxing primary every single turn. And if I'm smart, let's see. If I go, because I went 8, 16. If I go 8, 8, 8 for 24, I mean, that would put me a 48 primary if I just decided to kill everything. Oh no, I would get no, because I would get 16 on turn 3, and then I would be controlling the entire board. There is not a secondary objective I would not be able to get from my opponent, except maybe if I had drawn Bring It Down at some point. And that would have been it. So I would have scored maximum primary and nearly maximum secondary throughout the course of the game. And at the end of it, ooh, we didn't actually score this one out. I'm actually really curious. Um, the end score that we reported in the tournament was a score of 70-17. Man, I actually wonder if this might have been my most dominant victory ever. Because just for context, the biggest win I've ever had prior to this game was one where I went to There's Only War at GT in Phoenix, Arizona, where my first round opponent, Eric, in 9th edition, I beat 100-22 for a 78-point win. This might have been a bigger win than that, but I will never know because we didn't actually properly score out the rest of the game. But yeah, a score of 70-17 means that I end up getting 20 WTC points because I won by a margin of 51 points or more. Now, with that, how did the rest of my team do? Well, as we kind of expected, Evan absolutely thrashed Mike's Imperial Knights because Votann, Judgment Tokens, very good stuff into Knights. It is almost impossible for an army like that to do well into Votann. So Evan got 18 points. Then Luis, playing Death Guard into Votann, ended up getting 9 points to Nick's 11. Ryan, unfortunately, got a 0 to Brandon's 20, meaning that he and I cancel each other out. And Sage lost the Custodes Mirror 5-15. And I later heard that this was mostly a game of who was rolling better on their 4-ups. But that means that at the end of the round, the Git Posers scored 52, and Team Ronin scored 48, meaning that we drew our second round. That's our second draw in a row, and this one was fully real. Our first one, maybe a little fraudulent, but hey, we'll take every single point we can get. After that, we had round 3, and we jumped directly into it. And this time, we were playing up against XPZ Team Macho Men plus Willie. XPZ Team Macho Men and Willie was Brett and his Orcs, Anthony and his Astra Militarum, Matthew and his Chaos Space Marines, another Matthew and his 1,000 Suns, and Will and his Chaos Knights. Now again, unfortunately, I don't remember how all the pairings went. Oh, I do remember the first part. I remember how my pairing went. I believe their first defender was Chaos Space Marines. And they chose the light table. Again, the one that has no terrain on it. Not literally no, just almost no terrain on it. And I think we must have been me and Evan's Votann into it, and they chose to play against me. For the rest of the pairings, we had Ryan and his Blood Angels playing against Brett and his Orcs, Sage and his Custodes playing into Anthony as Guard, and Anthony was playing, I believe, a pretty standard indirect list. I think it was like double Manticore, double Basilisk, or something like that. He definitely had a couple Manticores for sure. Luis took his Death Guard into Matt's 1,000 Suns, and Evan played his Votann. I don't know how we got this twice. We got Evan's Votann into Will's Chaos Knights. Now, we felt pretty decent about our matchups overall. I expected to have a really good game into the Marines. We knew that Evan was going to have a really good game into the Knights. Unfortunately, sorry, Ryan, he was a self-proclaimed, not particularly strong player. We kind of knew that we would put him into something that he would have the most fun in, and turned out that was Orcs. And then we didn't really know how Death Guard was going to do into 1,000 Suns. In the matchup matrix that I had drawn up before the tournament, we thought it was going to be okay. It was not, but we'll get into that a bit later. For our third round of the day, going into Matt and his Space Marines. Matt was playing Abaddon the Despoiler, Cypher, 2 Cultist mobs, both with the Nurgle Mark of Chaos, 1 Chaos Rhino with a Mark of Slanesh, 2 units of Chaos Bikers with Marks of Nurgle, 2 Vindicators with Marks of Nurgle, 1 Hellbrute, also with a Mark of Nurgle, 2 units of Noise Marines, 1 unit of Obliterators with a Mark of Tzeentch, and then 2 units of Raptors with Marks of Nurgle. Lots of Nurgle going all around. Now, the cool thing about this army is he does have one trick with his Vindicators. They have Demolisher Cannons, which are 24-inch range, and crucially, they do have a stratagem whereby for 1 CP, you can basically make them blown up. And after I shoot or declare the target, he can be like, nope, blown up, and then I can still select different targets. Now, for this game, we end up playing this one on Mission B. Priority targets, hidden supplies, and search and destroy. Now, search and destroy is the quarter deployment, right? And hidden supplies means that there are 6 objectives on the board instead of just 5. 2 of them each go 6 inches out from the center towards the corners that are in no man's land. Now, going into this matchup, I had not played Chaos Space Marines in this edition. The last time I played it was actually up against one of the judges, Kyle Norman, where he played a Lord of Skulls up against me in 9th edition. So that meant that I got to dodge out on all the Chosen and Rhinos earlier in this edition. But looking at Matt's list, my biggest thing is I knew a Vindicator could, but was very unlikely to kill the Stormsword in one turn. Like, if he rolled super hot, max number of shots, he could do damage. But because the map was almost entirely open, he could only really ever present one target to me at a time so that he could consistently use his lone op. So what that ended up effectively meaning throughout the game is, as long as I wasn't playing super aggressive and letting both Vindicators shoot in a single turn, I was almost always going to be winning the trade war in terms of shooting back and forth. Yes, he can loan up the one, but as long as that's the only thing that's shooting, and the other Vindicator is not shooting at an important target, I didn't care that much. Because it should not be killing my Stormsword in a single turn. So my basic game plan was kind of similar to what I had going up against Brad. I set up the terrain such that, well, I guess, I set up the mostly non-existent terrain such that my Stormsword, if it moved out, could control all 3 objectives except the southeast one, with total firepower domination across that. And I could move Catachan and Kasrkin to the southeast objective such that I could always auto-see my opponent and deny that every single turn. And because we're priority targets, you need to keep your opponent to one objective in order to prevent them from maxing primary each turn. And that was my basic game plan across this game. Importantly, the 2 crates that you saw in the middle, things could be seen through that. I think some Kasrkin and Catachan might have been able to hide behind them, but like most Marines were visible behind it just because the Stormsword is tall enough to actually see over it. But the biggest plan was to just hold on to 2 objectives, the northwest one of the ones in the middle, perhaps, and then consistently auto-see my opponent on the southeast. So I never really cared if something was there, if it died, because I was always going to be bringing things back over and over again, back on that objective. In this game, Matt ended up going first. We basically both deploy. I deploy all my Bullgryn on the line. I deploy my Kasrkin behind the Obscuring Ruin and out of range of the Demolisher because it's only 24 inches. And then I scout move my Catachan and my Kasrkin forward along the southern wall, or the southern edge of the board. And then Matt ends up going first. He ends up drawing Cleanse and Secure No Man's Land, which was relatively easily. His Rhino moved towards the southeast objective, unloaded some Noise Marines over there, and then he took, some of his idiots, as he was fond of calling them, his cultists, and they moved out, and they end up cleansing both of the 2 southeast objectives. Fair enough, fine early turn. I don't think he did. Maybe he killed a Bullgryn? Maybe he killed 2. I don't know. It was not a lot of damage they ended up doing to me. My turn 2 was fairly similar. I end up drawing Area Denial and Assassination. I end up going in, kill off all the cultists, and deny him the area in the middle. And I start plan deny Matt the southeast objective from here. And for the first turn, it's pretty much just done by advancing Catachan onto the southeast objective and just saying, hey, I just put 15 OC on this objective. What are you going to do about it? The rest of the game kind of was that over and over again. And I feel a little bit bad for Matt because he bricked a lot on his secondaries. Because every single turn from this point on basically played the same way. I moved my Stormsword to a position where it could only ever be shot by one Vindicator. And and then I would move Catachan or Kasrkin onto the southeast objective and out-OC him there. He was never able to put any real threat on getting me off of an objective, particularly because I just sat one unit of Kasrkin on the northwest objective. They sat there the entire game, and all they did, I think they shot some bikers once. That might have been it. But basically, on the second turn, Matt drew engage on all fronts, which he only scored for 3, and bring it down. And at the time, my only bring it down target that he could potentially shoot at was a Stormsword. And, you know, if he got lucky, the Vindicator could take one down, because between the sustained hits on 5s and the lethal hits on 5s, it was possible for him to try and kill the Stormsword with one Vindicator. He did shoot on turn 2, and I think he did like 10, 12, maybe 12 wounds to the Stormsword, but it didn't even bracket it. I didn't even have to take a Battle Shock test, and then I ended up healing it back up. Whereas on my turn, I would deploy Teleport Homer and extend battle lines on turn 2. Very easy scores. Did that, continue to recycle the operation of make sure that Matt can never play for the Southeast objective. I think on turn 2, I charged Catachan in to his Noise Marines, and Straken killed 2 or 3 by himself. It was great. Turn 3 rolled around, and then Matt got deploy Teleport Homer and Assassination. He ended up deploying a Teleport Homer in the middle with Cultists, I believe. But the other thing that happened on turn 3 was, at this point, my Bullgryn had gotten far enough that I yeeted one of them, maybe 2 of them. I yeeted 2 of them onto his side of the board. And I killed off a unit of Raptors. I think it was Raptors that were chilling out there. The other one swung into Cultists and killed a bunch of them. But crucially, the one that killed the Raptors was able to consolidate into his Obliterators, which had popped out or had can't come in with Deep Strike and use their once per game indirect to kill a couple of Bullgryn. But, I mean, just by having, I think I had 2 units of 3 Bullgryn in his deployment zone, like on his home objective at this point, he couldn't leave. Right, he was never able to present enough threats that my Stormsword was overloaded with things that it needed to shoot at, and it bought me a ton of time. Even though on his turn 3 he did kill both of them, with deploy, teleport, homer, and assassination, I had no characters visible to him. Right, I had Gaunt's Ghost and a Callidus who are both lone up, who are hiding on my side of the board or in ruins or something. They were too far for him to see. And then the rest of them were in Lord Solar's unit, where without any precision, you're not killing them through all the ablative wounds with 6-up Feel No Pains that I had on my side of the board to keep them safe. My turn 3 was pretty similar. I got Investigate Signals and Overwhelming Force. I only killed off one thing on an objective. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was... Oh, it was whatever he moved out to deploy Teleport Homers with. So I think it was Cultists. And then I was able to investigate 3 signals. I wasn't able to do the one in his deployment zone because he was screening it out well enough. But hey, I scored another 9 points on secondaries on turn 3. And I continued the operation of, Matt, you do not get to play for the southeast objective ever. Now on turn 4 is where Matt needed to go all in. And he said, yes, it is time to go all in. And he moved out both Vindicators. I think only one of them got to shoot at the Stormsword, and it didn't kill it. I think I saved almost all of my saves, and he did basically no damage to it. But he also moved them out and the Hellbrute. And they all came out all at once. And he only can loan up one of them. Now, the one thing that I do remember on my turn 4, because he did storm hostile objective. I think he took the southeast objective. Maybe it was, no, it was the center southeast objective away from me, because I think I had like a Bullgryn or something on it. Anyway, he does manage to get it from me, but he also gets area denial, and he's not able to get anything wholly within 6. So even though I don't think I had anything within 6, because he had nothing wholly within 6, he wasn't able to score area denial. But he did choose to keep it. I think you need to roll a 5 on Cultists in order to get them wholly within. But my turn 4, I tell Matt, if I roll bring it down here on my secondaries, the game is just over. Because I am going to kill whichever Vindicator you do not loan up, and I'm going to do some more damage to you after that. And the one cute thing I remember doing at this point was the Hellbrute had done enough damage to itself through like I want to say hazardous, but dark pack tests and something exploding. I don't remember exactly how it was low. I think it was just legitimately failing dark pack tests over and over again. That it was low enough that it was down to 3 wounds. And what I ended up doing is I had a unit of 10 Kasrkin. I double moved them for a total of 12 inches, and I advanced them because, again, the grenade stratagem just says has not shot in your shooting phase, not is eligible to shoot. So I moved them to be both on the southeast objective to get a couple OC there, and also within 8 inches of the Hellbrute. And he did overwatch it with one of the Vindicators, and he killed 8 out of the 10 Kasrkin. But I was able to keep 1 on the objective and 1 within 8 inches of the Hellbrute, meaning that I was going to have 1 OC on the objective plus whatever else. I think I also brought him some more Catachan over there, and also was in range to chuck a grenade. And I chucked the grenade, killed the Hellbrute. I think it exploded. But the other thing that I did is I opened up with a Stormsword because I'd been playing this game of moving it back and forth in such ways that only one Vindicator would ever be able to shoot at it. And the Vindicator, or not the Vindicator, the Stormsword this time around, it opened up, absolutely demolished one of the Vindicators just through regular shooting, killed off the cultists that were close to the middle, and all he had left at the top of his turn 5 was Abaddon, the Obliterators, and Vindicator, and one of the Vindicators, the one that I had not shot. And he had, at this time, I had Gaunt's, I had basically my entire army, except Bullgryn, were all active all on the map. Again, the Kasrkin in the northwest had sat there literally the entire game. They had taken 1 casualty because bikes had come in and shot them a little bit. But he had Scions that were a problem, and he ended up killing them, and I rezzed them. And then he also had a bunch of Catachan that were hiding behind the ruin near his home objective because I had brought them in because they had died and come back. And Abaddon ran in and tied them up in melee and killed all but one of them, which was pretty funny. Now, in his desperate bid to kind of take control and score some points at the very end, because on priority targets, you score 5 points up to a maximum of 15 for every objective you control at the end of the game. He pushed out and said, I have sticky objectives on his home objective. But when he got overwhelming force and he killed a couple things off of objectives, he did get the points there. But I rolled tempting target, behind enemy lines, and cleanse. And he picked a tempting target on something that I could not get anything on, but I spent a CP to re-roll it, got behind enemy lines and cleanse. Cleanse was very easy to do, and crucially, with his obliterators, he had moved out of range. And so my Gaunt's ghosts were able to deep strike down onto his home objective, and even though he tried overwatching them, he only made me take 3 saves. I didn't even take them because I said it does not matter if I fail all of these, I will still have at least 1 model on the objective. And the crucial thing was, I think, if I remember correctly, only 2 of his 4 obliterators were in range to shoot because Lonop is by model. And he only had 2 obliterators able to shoot at the Gaunt's Ghost, so he didn't even get the full overwatch with them. But at the very end of the game, I end up controlling 5 objectives. I control everything but the center southeast one. And he controlled 0 because the Vindicator that was on the center southeast one got shot by the Stormsword. And we ended this game with a score of 100 to the good guys, to the Astra Militarum, to 56 to Matt and his Chaos Space Marines. And in WTC terms, that means that I won this one 18-2, which was more dominant than I was expecting. But they were the ones who did choose to play on the light terrain, and that was absolutely something that ended up working massively in my favor. And during it, this is one of the interesting things about playing teams, right? Is because your people are more likely to take skewed lists in one way or another, looking for certain pairings. Matt's list was not particularly well suited to deal with guard because he could not consistently kill enough of my infantry units. And as we both talked about during the game, every single time he would kill something, I would just put it in reserve. Next turn, I would bring it away 9 inches from the southeast objective. And even if he killed something on there, I would just march new guys onto the objective over and over again. And even though it didn't really matter if I held it because I was holding my own home and the northwest objective with Kasrkin, so I was scoring 10 points every turn, it meant that I was denying him 5 points every single time with a 5-point swing every single turn because my reinforcements were just infinite on the southeast corner of the board. He never once scored more than 5 primary in a turn. So that's my second real dominant win, and arguably my third if you want to count the forfeit, which the tournament did, and that'll come back in a bit. But how did the rest of the team do? So we had Ryan and his Blood Angels. Unfortunately, he got a 0-20 into Brett and his Orcs. So that entirely counteracted my game. It was actually a little bit worse than that. Good for us. Sage and his Custodes beat Anthony 13-7. Now, I don't know a lot about how that game went, but it was one where I knew that Sage was into Anthony's side of the board relatively quickly, so Anthony had to play the periphery. Luis and his Death Guard lost 2-18 to Matt and his Thousand Sons. Now, that was, again, a direct counteraction of mine. So, at this point, we're looking at a bit of a tough spot. But luckily, our last matchup was Evan and his Votan against Will and his Chaos Knights, and Evan won that one 16-4. Meaning that overall, the score was Git Posers 49, the XPZ, Team Macho Man and Willie, 51. We got our third draw of the tournament. And at this point, we started saying, hey, we're not the Git Posers. We're the average Gits. We are the most average you can possibly be. And that was very funny. Our Captain Lou was saying, hey, if y'all don't continue getting draws tomorrow, y'all are fired. I don't want you coming back. Obviously a jest. But it was a very funny time. Oh, important story. So apparently Luis has a bit of a history with the Get Hammer guys. And one of the funniest things that happened during this tournament was that the morning of, at 7:40 in the morning, we get a message from Luis. And I'm going to read it directly for you. Oh, at 7:50 a.m., Luis says in the big team chat, just finished painting the army. 7:50 the morning of, just finished painting the army. And he was talking about how, he was on like 2 hours of sleep because he had been up all night trying to make sure that his army had 3 colors at the very least and, met the standards for battle ready at the event. And it was very funny. Everybody grouped around later and started taking pictures and videos of his army and, giving him the shit he probably deserves for having his stuff ready the morning of. But either way, he still blames me because I kicked him off the guard that he was playing. But either way, so at the end of it, at the end of day 1, the Git Posers are currently 0-0-3. 0 wins, 0 losses, 3 ties. I have technically gone 20-20-18 and had 58 points. At the end of day 1, I was the number 1 scorer in the entire tournament, which made me feel good about myself. Obviously, my team was playing to help me find these winning matchups, but it was something where it's like, well, it meant that I'm delivering on what I'm trying to do. So that meant we all went home. I was staying at my cousin's place in Costa Mesa, which is a lot closer than where I live in LA, in order to cut down on my commute time for all this. So I went back. I crashed. Every time I go to an event, it doesn't really matter how many games I actually played. I just crash. I kind of dissociate after 3 rounds of play. And I woke up the next morning, and it was daylight savings time reversals. We sprang forward, and we all lost an hour of sleep. But we got back, and the next day, we ended up pairing into the XPZ Lads, another XPZ team. XPZ ended up bringing 6 teams. Githammer brought 4. I know there were multiple Dice Hammer teams. I know Team Zero Comp brought multiple teams. I know Making Saves brought multiple teams. So there's a lot of representation from a couple of Umbrella orgs. The only local team that I really know of that didn't actually bring anything were the Riverside Ripper Swarms. The SEAL Team Ripper Swarms I played in round 1 featured some of their prominent members, but as a Umbrella org, they actually didn't bring a lot of people. Anyway, going into our round 4, like I said, the Git Posers were playing up against the XPZ Lads. They were playing Ryan and his Blood Angels. And we also had a Ryan playing Blood Angels, so don't get them mixed up. We had Jason and his Adepta Sororitas, the sisters. We had Steven and his Guard. we had Taylor and his Necrons, and we had Russell and his Eldar. Now, I remember thinking, looking at this, dang, none of these are matchups I'm particularly interested in playing. Necrons is pretty drawish for me. Blood Angels is supposed to be tough, but I've never played it. Sisters is supposed to be even-ish, but because I have one big unit, he can sink a lot of Miracle Dice into just killing it outright, which is a problem for me. Steven was playing another relatively heavy indirect list for the guard, and Eldar is draw-ish, but it becomes very much a game of can he kill my Stormsword or not. And I remember feeling fairly good into Russell's list because I believe he didn't bring any Fire Dragons. And looking at it again, he did not bring any Fire Dragons. So I actually felt okay playing into his Eldar list because if they don't have enough Bright Lances or Melta weapons, it's tough to kill 24 wounds of super heavy. Our pairings ended up going, we had Sage and his Custodes playing into Ryan and his Blood Angels. Our Ryan and our Blood Angels playing into Jason and his sisters. Evan and his Votan played into Steven and his Guard. I ended up playing into Taylor and his Necrons. And Luis ended up playing his Death Guard into Russell's Eldar. Now, I know fairly early on, I'm pretty sure Taylor and his Necrons were their Defender 1. And they chose a Dice Hammer board. And I remember putting me and I believe Sage into the Necrons. And when they picked me, I told my captain, Luis, like, hey, he asked, like, is this a good matchup for you? And I'm like, not particularly, but it should be pretty draw-ish. Like, even if he kills the Stormsword, I have the tools to just control enough of the board that it'll be okay. And looking at Taylor's list, Taylor is playing Hypercrypt Necrons. Hypercrypt 10.6.3 is the name of his list. Now, I don't know what that means. It sounds like he's gone through a lot of versions of this list, potentially. Taylor's list was not one I was particularly happy to see. Taylor brought a Nightbringer Catachan, the Void Dragon Catachan, and a Transcendent Catachan. He also brought 2 Hexmark Destroyers, the Lone Up Pistol-y dudes, a Locust Lord with the Osteoclave Fulcrum enhancement. One of the Hexmark Destroyers had a Dimensional Overseer enhancement. He brought 2 Doomsday Arcs, 1 unit of 5 Flayed Ones, 1 unit of 6 Locust Destroyers, and 3 units of 2 Locust Heavy Destroyers. Now, the big problem that I had with this list was that it could kill the Stormsword. Right, he had enough Strength 14 shots that were going down range with heavy AP that he was going to do serious damage to it. And it was a situation where if I lost 500 points of my army after that, would I be able to take enough board control to be okay in the rest of the game? And I apologize in advance because I forgot to take photos for this entire game. I don't have a single one, so I'm going to throw up some random photos of Catan and whatever else I have to try and make things look a little bit better. But we ended up playing this one on Mission L, Scorched Earth, Chilling Rain, and Dawn of War. Now, Dawn of War was a bit of a horror for me because Dawn of War has a massive deployment zone. It is basically impossible to zone out your opponent with the amount of mobility that Hypercrypt Necrons have. If he gets behind enemy lines or deploy Teleport Homer, it is very tough to prevent him from just doing whatever he wants on my side of the board. The other thing is that Scorched Earth is a mission that's a little bit difficult for me in general because it is hard for me, especially on Dawn of War, to hold objectives long enough to actually burn an objective. It also becomes very difficult for my army because my army likes to spread out and be on as many objectives as possible most of the time. It's tough for me to focus down quickly enough because he is able to, if he can sense that, hey, Josh is just trying to play on this side of the board, he's going to burn one on the other side and they can test me on the other objectives because his army is mobile enough to do that. But anyway, it's very funny because as we start deploying terrain, Taylor puts all of his terrain pieces, walls toward the edge of the board and the open footprints towards the center of the board. We were also playing on Dice Hammer. I think I said that already. No, we were playing on Squad Marks. We were playing on Squad Marks terrain instead, so there was the fixed center in this one. But it was very readily apparent from the very beginning of the game that Taylor did not care what his side of the board looked like. And in fact, he wanted the board to be as open as possible so that he could have as many firing lanes to guarantee that anything he picked up with his Hypercrypt hyperphasing, he would be able to shoot at whatever target he wanted it to with the range and firing angles that he would have. So, with all of that, we end up rolling off to go first, and I think really luckily for me, Taylor ended up going first. Now, that means that he loses an entire turn, so 20% of his activations of hyperphasing. And luckily for me, Taylor drew, engaged in all fronts, captured enemy outpost, and he ended up pitching capture enemy outpost on turn 1 because he does not have his hyperphasing. He can't come take my capture enemy outpost. I don't think he had a possible way of doing it. And he ended up drawing deploy teleport homers. Now this was really lucky for me because Necrons, when they're not hyperphasing, are fairly slow. And the only thing that he had far enough up the board that he could actually deploy teleport homers with was his flayed ones. And I wonder if it would have been better to pitch those points and just like create a wall in the middle of the board where I would not have been able to move up, because I basically just deployed most of my things on the line. I put Kasrkin on far ends of the board with ruins that they could scout move safely behind. And then Taylor spent the rest of his first turn taking all of his Hexmark destroyers and his Doomsday Arcs, pointing them all at my Stormsword and shooting. And I pop smoke because I know with only 1 CP and the really high damage profiles that he has, because I think Hexmark or the heavy destroyers do, I think it's flat 6, like a ridiculous amount of damage. But I pop smoke as my only real defense, and luckily it actually saves me a lot of shots because the Hexmark destroyers go from shooting on 3s to hitting on 4s, and he ended up rolling a lot of 3s. That ended up being really good for me. And then the Doomsday Arcs also shot, and overall, his entire army ends up doing 12 wounds, doing exactly half of the Stormsword's health. And that means that the Stormsword is crucially not even going to have to battle shock check, and also will be able to shoot at full firepower. Now my turn 1 goes a bit better than Taylor's. I roll Air Denial in behind enemy lines, and because I went second, I was able to pick up my Callidus and drop it behind his in his deployment zone, because he also has the same problem. He cannot screen out his whole deployment zone because it's too big. It's too long. You need too many overlapping circles that are significantly reduced because just the length of the deployment zone really hurts. And this is probably the only time the entire tournament that I can think of where I had a serious disagreement with my opponent on what the correct thing to do. So I'll go ahead and open this to the floor and ask you guys in a sec how you guys think this should have been resolved. But I draw Air Denial behind enemy lines. Like I said, I just move Bullgryn up. They move in. They kill off the flayed ones that are deploying a homer, and I get, or that had deployed a homer, and I get Air Denial. Let's get behind enemy lines. Now, during the shooting phase, here's what happens. I declare that my Stormsword is putting everything in range, which I believe was the main gun and las cannons, into one of the Doomsday Arcs, and my Stormsword remains stationary and shoots. I roll, and he saves, and the Doomsday Arc is left on 3 wounds. Okay, exactly 3, and this matters. Now, at this point, I also say, okay, let's make sure we do the mortal wounds. And I roll the first one on a 5-up, and I say, this is for the Doomsday Arc that I just shot at. And I roll a 5-up. And he says, hold on, let me make sure. And I don't remember the exact order of how this happens. I roll the 5-up, and then I also roll the D3 and get a 5 for 3 mortal wounds. Now, Taylor says that he had put the clock back on him and was looking up the rule, and he reads the rule for the Stormsword, and he's reading the rule called Concussive Wave, and he reads, roll 1d6 every other unit within 3 of that unit. And I go, wait, there's no way that's right. So I go ahead and look it up as well, and it actually says roll 1d6 for the target unit and every other unit within 3 inches of that unit. Now, I rolled a 5-up on the Doomsday Arc, rolled a 3 for 3 mortal wounds. And I also rolled for a Hexmark Destroyer and the other Doomsday Arc that were next to it, and it did not do any mortal wounds to either of them. And then Taylor claims that because I rolled on his clock, the roll needs to be redone. And my claim was that I had already legitimately rolled it, and I rolled the 3 mortal wounds into the Doomsday Arc, which is a massive difference, right? That is a 1 in 9 that I had legitimately rolled. And so what we ended up doing is I could tell that he was a little agitated, I was a little agitated. Like, I start at the beginning of every game, like round 1, like my hands are a little bit shaky because like I get a little bit of adrenaline flowing. It makes me think of like tournaments, like when I was actually playing Smash tournaments. Like I would always, my very first game, I would be a little bit shaky. When I would play like chess tournaments when I was a kid, like I'd be a little bit shaky at first just because like the adrenaline's going, right? I'm in game mode. And luckily, Kyle, one of the judges, happened to be walking right by. And so I ask Kyle, Taylor explains his side of the argument, I explain my side of the argument, and Kyle says, like, I don't really know how to resolve this because, one, I wasn't here. It's like both, what you guys are saying, what is true. And so Kyle says, are you guys okay with taking, roll a 4 up? On a 4 up, Josh re rolls, and on a 1, 2, or 3, the results stand. And we both go, yeah, I mean, I can't think of a better way to resolve this. And if the judge can't come up, instantly come up with a better way, we will abide by that decision no matter what. And so Kyle rolls a die, and it's a 1. And crucially, that means that the Doomsday Arc took the 3 mortal wounds and died. It did not explode. But I remember at that point, I made a video on my old channel, which I no longer use, where I made, or I basically made a statement where, like, once you no longer feel like you can trust your opponent, games of 40k suck. Like, it is not fun because you generally don't know your opponent's rules well enough to question them on a lot of different things. And that was definitely a position where Taylor reported that in his round 3, he played against another opponent who he said he didn't feel like he could trust because they weren't measuring movement properly. Now, of course, I end up reaching out to the captain of that team because I know who that is and just say, like, hey, just want to let you know, I did get this report about one of your players. I can't verify it or anything, but it is something where it's like, hey, if it's noted and it becomes a pattern, let's do something about it. Anyway, with that in mind, we're definitely at a spot where we're both a little bit agitated, and we both go through, and I think from that point on, we're both very deliberate about how we talk about the clock, everything we say we do, and we end up not having a single another issue the rest of the game, which is fantastic. And I think at the end of the game, and we'll talk about the rest of the game in a sec, he ended up thanking me. He's like, hey, thanks for helping to calm me down. Um, I was definitely a little bit worried that I was going to have another tough game like my last one. We actually, apparently his 5th round was also a bit of a tough game. I didn't really hear why, but it did not sound like Taylor had the best event, just because, rough experience with his opponents. But we had a very good game after that point, and honestly, that was the only time the entire tournament where I ever felt agitated. The only time where I ever felt um, something was going to be played not entirely above board. But it ends up being everything worked out. I do not want to say, I only want to say positive things about Taylor after that because that was the only time where we had a little bit of a disagreement, and it's hard to entirely fault him because at least one of the roles, it might have been for the Hexmark Destroyer and the other Doomsday Arc, at least that for sure were done while he was looking at the rules. But I also said, like, yeah, they do nothing. Anyway, all that said, let's talk about the rest of the game. Doomsday Arc explodes, and I feel a little bit better about my chances on the next turn. Um, I get pretty lucky, actually, throughout this game because Taylor ended up bricking a lot of his secondaries. Like I said, he drew 3 secondaries, having discarded Capture Any Outpost on turn 1. He wasn't able to do Engage in All Fronts on his turn 1 because he needed to be 3 inches away from, or 3 inches into the table quarter in order for it to count. You can't just be like towing over the line. So he ended up losing Engage in All Fronts. He lost Capturing the Outpost, which, having listened to Matt Laura talk about how Hypercrypt plays, you can do fairly consistently, especially if you have a Monolith. And he only got 3 on Teleport Homers. His turn 2 was not a lot better because he did not manage to take any objective in no man's land. So he only scored his home objective, and um, he only was able to get on one objective for secure no man's land, and he only killed one thing for no prisoners. Now, that one thing that he killed for no prisoners was my Stormsword. So let's not say like it was not a bad turn for him, but he did not score a lot of secondary points or primary points on his turn 2. And so at the end of his turn 2, he had only scored 7 points on secondary, which you should be hoping to score 15 to 20, and he only scored 5 points on primary, where you're generally hoping to score 10. So he's sitting a little bit less than half the points he might have been hoping to score at this point. As we pass back to me, a very important thing happens that we did not realize until after the game was in and we submitted the scores. We both forgot to score my primary at the top of turn 2. So I end up missing out on 10 points that I'm supposed to have at this point. Now, I do not fault Taylor. I mostly fault myself because those are 10 points that I'm supposed to have. And we checked in with each other throughout the course of the game, just like, hey, is this the score that you see? Yes, this is the score that I see. And I don't realize it until after we had already submitted scores. I messaged him about it. He said, oh, we probably should have reported the right score. It's okay. It could have changed some things. But I was like, no. I shook hands. That's what the score that we reported. I agreed to it at the time, and I can't take that back. And I will not take that back ever. There's actually another time. Again, fun stories. Old tournament that I played at in 9th edition, there was the one where if you weren't holding your own home objective at the beginning of or during your own command phase, you lost a point. And in that edition, my opponent took my home objective at the end of the game and says, ha, you lose a point now. And it ended up being a draw. But that's not how that worked. That is not how that worked. I was not supposed to lose that point, but I didn't know that until after I looked back at it later on. So it's interesting. A very interesting spot overall. But again, whatever score you submit, you got to stick to. Whenever you shake hands, that should be the final score, for sure. Anyway, I ended up getting Extend Battle Lines and Defend Stronghold, and I was a little bit worried about the Defend Stronghold because I was not sure if I would be able to score it. And the thing about Defend Stronghold into Hypercrypt, or in general, is if you have it and you do not score it at the end of your opponent's next turn, you are stuck with it for a whole nother turn, and it doesn't score you a lot of points. So if you have Defend Stronghold and you can't do it, it sucks. It's a really bad secondary to draw. But on this turn, this is where I start becoming a little bit more active. I charge Colonel Straken and his Catachan into, I believe it's that Transcendent Catan. It's the one that teleports. And I get them in. They do about half of the Catan and also take him off of the western objective. However, also I believe on my turn 2, he Rapid Ingresses his Void Dragon onto the eastern objective. So he will be able to hold at least 2 going into his turn 3. But I do a little bit of damage there, and this is where things start getting a little bit tough for me because on my turn 2, I still have my Bullgryn, and I think on my turn 2, I'm able to get a charge off with one of my units of Bullgryn onto his home objective. But they take a lot of damage because he's able to overwatch them with both a Doomsday Arc, which just has like 24 shots off of his Gauss flare thing, Tesla array, whatever it's called. And then his Hexmark Destroyer can also overwatch for free immediately after that. So they end up taking a fair amount of damage running on in, but they're able to tag both the Hexmark Destroyer and the Doomsday Arc, and that ends up being nice because I constantly create a problem for him. And I leave one unit of 6 Bullgryn on the middle objective, making sure that he cannot hypercrypt anything directly there. But I don't think I really kill anything else. I know my Callidus has been fighting up against some of his Locust Destroyers for a little while, and, they do some damage. He ends up healing all of it, and I think I kill 2 Hexmark Destroyers for the rest of the game, and that's it. But anyway, going into turn 3, Taylor ends up drawing Area Denial and Cleanse. Now, I don't know if he forgot about Cleanse or just chose not to do it, but he ends up scoring a 0, and he bricks on Cleanse on his turn 3. In Area Denial, because I have a unit of 6 Bullgryn who are wholly within 6 and also within 3, being directly on the center objective, placing the 40 mil base on the 40 mil objective, he would need to entirely kill my Bullgryn in order to score air denial. And that's basically an impossible task for him to try and get through, because all the 4-up saves, and he has to hit and blah, blah, blah. Very tough thing for him to try and do. But the important thing that happens on turn 3 is on my turn 3, I end up drawing Cleanse and Secure No Man's Land. And I make one of the biggest mistakes I make in several games. Like, probably at least 10 games at this point. Where what I end up doing on turn 3, I'm not going to be able to take anything away from him because my Catachan do not have enough OC currently on the objective in the west to take it from him. And in the east, I have a unit of Battleshock Kasrkin. Now, this will come back in a sec. I end up only controlling one objective at the end of the turn, which is the middle one where I do end up cleansing. But I charge the Catachan in, and they end up getting destroyed by the Nightbringer. And at this point, I have 2 or 3 CP. I can res the Catachan. But then we go over to the other fight, where the Void Dragon kills a 2 Kasrkin that I had charged in. At that point, I realize, oh no, they're battle shocked. I cannot use the reinforcement strat on them to bring them back, which is what I was planning to do. And I ask Taylor, hey, this is entirely on me. It's up to you. If I had realized that the Kasrkin were battle shocked, I would not. I mean, I've already done the charges. I've made the attacks. I can't take that part back. But I would have rezzed the Catachan instead. Are you okay with that? And he says no, and I don't fault him for that at all. Right? I made the wrong decision, and I ended up having to live with that mistake. But it means that normally as a guard player, I'm supposed to be playing these games with a 2,400 point army because turns 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5, I'm going to be bringing back, a 100 point Kasrkin unit or a 110 point Catachan unit basically every turn, sometimes more than that. And it ends up putting me in a spot where I've just lost 2 units where I shouldn't have lost either of them. The Kasrkin should have still been alive and had a chance to pass a new battle shock test, or the Catachan would have come back when I charged them in. But it ends up being a poor secondary turn for me. I only get Cleanse for 1 objective and only 1 objective for Secure No Man's Land in the middle. And we start getting into, the final parts of the game. He has a bunch of Hexmark Destroyers that don't have a lot of good targets, and a couple Catan that are slow, that are hanging out on the western and eastern objectives, and I have a lot of little guys just kind of running around. And I actually bring in 1 unit of Kasrkin on my turn 3 into the southeast corner in order to try and get onto the eastern objective, because at this point I'm expecting that Taylor will try and burn it. But on his turn 4, he rolls Overwhelming Force and Behind Enemy Lines, and he's able to kill off a couple of things. I think I had an Enginseer on the east that I was trying to charge in and get killed off so that he doesn't score Assassinate against him. And he also kills off Kasrkin that run onto the western objective, chuck a grenade and throw a Meltamine at the Catan, and they end up leaving it on 1 wound. And I don't remember exactly how. I think I pinged it off with a Mortar, actually. Yeah, I did. I pinged it off with a Mortar because I left it on 1 wound. I'm like, well, gotta do it. We gotta get the morale victory and at least kill 1 of the Catan, which we do. We end up killing the Kasrkin on the west and something on the east, and he drops one of the Hexmark Destroyers in the southwest in my deployment zone in order to score Behind Enemy Lines for 3. On turn 4, I end up being in a really tough position because I don't have a lot of things left, and I have a lot of secondaries that are kind of dead because I'm not going to kill basically anything in his army for the rest of the game. And so I end up drawing Deploy Teleport Homer and no prisoners. Now, luckily, I did still have Scions. Oh, that's what he killed. He killed some Scions. And when he killed them, I reinforced them. I put them in his deployment zone, and I was able to deploy homers there. But the only other thing that I had was I had some Kasrkin that when they came back onto the board, they moved in range, and the only thing in his entire army that I could get in range of and that I could kill was the Hexmark Destroyer that was behind enemy lines. So I brought in unit of 10. He overwatches it, and I think kills like 4 of them. But luckily, I still have all my special weapons. I'm able to kill off the Hexmark Destroyer and at least get no prisoners off the table and score a couple of points on it. And then the last turn, I get really lucky again because crucially, Hyperphase, you have to pick up your units before you know what your secondaries are. And he only picks up one unit. And he rolls Investigate Signals and Defend Stronghold. Now, luckily for him, my Bullgryn that are on his side of the board have been battle shocked, that have been sitting on his home objective this entire time. They've been battle shocked for most of the game, just because they just continuously fail. And he kills off the signs that are over there pretty easily. But the only thing he's able to investigate signals on is the northeast corner with the Locust Destroyers. And they just go in there, they do an action, but nothing else can interrupt my side of the board. But I can't take his stronghold because my Bullgryn are out of range. They will not be able to out-OC him on that objective. And so he ends up going 5, 10, 10, 10 for all of his primary. I'm supposed to score 4 10s because it's just hold 2, and I hold the middle one the entire game and my home the entire game. But on my last turn, I end up rolling Investigate Signals and Engage in all fronts, and I cannot do Investigate Signals. Nothing can get within range. Nothing can get within range to investigate signals, and Engage in all fronts I can do for 3. And the last thing that I remember doing for this one is because an objective is a 40 mil circle for the actual objective, I can put units in one table quarter and still be on the objective because they will be more than 3 inches away from each table edge because it's based on the center, not 3 inches off of the objective button. So I'm able to do that. I get that one for 3 points, but I pitch Investigate Signals and draw a tempting target, which I cannot do because I cannot get onto his objectives on either the western or the east. But overall, this game was the closest game I played the entire tournament. And the score that we reported, the one that I'm going to show you right now, ends up being a score of 71 points to the guard to 65 points to the Necrons. Now, it's supposed to be 81 points to the guard to 65 points to the Necrons. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that Taylor bricked his secondaries super, super hard. He ends up scoring only 20 points on secondaries, even though he gets 35 on primary and beating me there. But scoring 20 on secondaries on Hypercrypt is a brutal brick. He got a ton of objectives he just could not do throughout the entire game. Whereas I scored secondaries, at least one secondary every single turn, and ended up getting 31. I got a couple of minor bricks, but no full bricks until turn 5. So we ended up scoring an 11-9. It's supposed to be a 13-7 if we had remembered my primary on turn 2, but again, the score we reported and the official score, and the one that I stand by, is 71 to 65. Now, with an 11-9, it's my least dominant win that I've had so far this tournament. But with 11 points, let's talk about how the rest of my team does. Sage and his Custodes ends up going 3-17 against Ryan and his Blood Angels. My Ryan, with my Blood Angels, ends up going 0-20 to Jason and his sisters. And my Ryan says that he basically was tabled on turn 1. Now, I don't know exactly how that happened, but Jason absolutely thrashed my Ryan. Evan and his Votan end up going 17-3 against Steven and his Astra Militarum. What I end up hearing later is that Evan ends up landing every single one of his Deep Strike chargers. His Hearthguard come in, and 9 inches away, tag the Mana Cores. His other Hearthguard come in, run in, tag, I think, the Lord Solar Squad, just taking total control of the board. And Steven, who was playing a guard list that was also running Canis Rex, just whiffed his 9-inch charges. Or maybe he got one of them, but Evan hit every single one. That's a massive deal when you're playing Votan. That's the biggest thing that I've seen really affect my games going into Votan, is if the Hearthguard can Deep Strike in and land that 9-inch charge, it's a massive game changer. Anyway, I go 11-9 into Taylor, and Luis and his Death Guard ends up going 5-15 into Russell and his Eldar. And overall, this means that Git Posers, we score 36, and the XPZ Lads score 64. And unfortunately, that is the Git Posers' first loss of the tournament. We've gone 3 draws and 1 loss, and that means that we're getting ready for our 5th round. And unfortunately, we say we're no longer the average Gits. We're slightly below average Gits. But for our last round of the tournament, we end up playing up against Team Zero Comp White, which is Timothy and his Tyranids, Mike and his Tau, Will and his Custodes, Phil and his Death Guard, and Riley and her Necrons. And the biggest thing I remember about pairings is that they use Mike and his Tau as first defender, and they put him on the light terrain. This will make a lot of sense in just a minute. And we decide that we are going to put Votan and me into Mike. And Mike chooses to play against me. For the rest of the pairings, we get Evan and his Votan into Tyranids, which is a terrible matchup for the Votan. We get Luis and his Death Guard into Will and his Custodes, and Luis really struggled in that one. I don't remember exactly what went wrong in it, but there was something where he did not properly do the damage that he was expecting to do into at least one Warden Brick, and then they turned around and killed him. Sage and his Custodes ended up going into Phil and his Death Guard, and Sage reports that Phil was playing some rules incorrectly, and I'm not going to leave it at that, but that is something that I did here, and even after Sage prompted Phil to like double check the rules, because Sage also had some experience with Death Guard, Phil continued to play them incorrectly. But lastly, we had Ryan and his Blood Angels playing into Riley and her Necrons. We got to talk about Mike and his list, because oh boy, is it a doozy. Now, he just named his list teams, which is not as exciting as some of the list names that I've seen. But for his two characters, he ended up playing two Firesight teams, one of them being his Warlord. Those are the little sniper guys with Lonop. Then he ran two Ghost Keels, three Riptides, a Storm Surge, one unit of two Tetras, and then two Tiger Shark Bombers. Now, these guys are absolutely massive, and for 275 points, they actually do a lot of shooting. They have two Cyclic Ion Blasters, two Ion Cannons, two Missile Pods, 6 Seeker Missiles, and 2 Sky Spear Missile Racks. They shoot a ton, and they're not Titanic for whatever reason. These things are massive. They're bigger than a Baneblade chassis. They're bigger than the Storm Surge, but for whatever reason, they are not Titanic, which means that they can Overwatch. However, Tiger Sharks do have a pretty big downside, and that is that their base is larger than 6 inches. That means that as aircraft, they must come in on turn 2 or later, and the turn that they come in, because their base cannot fit wholly within 6 inches of a board edge, they cannot act the turn they come in. Now, we were playing this one on the light terrain, which, funnily enough, was the exact same table that I was playing up against Matt and his Chaos Space Marines on. The exact same table. This was an interesting list, and I know that there's not a lot of things that can consistently kill a Stormsword in one turn. Tau can do it with Cyclics or with just sheer number of like Railgun and or Skyray shots. Right, they can take it down. It's not the end of the world for them. They can deal with it. But I know that Riptides are going to struggle into it. Ghost Kills are not going to do much, going to struggle into it. And the only thing after that is the Tiger Shark, which I've never played against a Tiger Shark. I don't expect to play against a Tiger Shark again. I don't actually have a good sense for how much damage a Tiger Shark does. Now, looking at the math now, a Tiger Shark will, on average, do about 9 wounds to a Stormsword. That means that both of them will do, on average, about 18 wounds to a Stormsword, which does not kill it. But I had no idea. The biggest thing about this game is that it was going to be very dice dependent, right? Whoever started shooting, whoever started doing damage first, was going to have a really big win. And this was the first game, and actually I think the only game I've played in 10th edition where both players decided to go fixed objectives. Naturally, as my opponent's entire army was vehicles, I went bring it down and deploy teleport homers, because he did not have enough things to screen, and I could almost always just rely on having like a Bullgryn boy with a bat chilling in the middle of the board, deploying homers, so I could get a 15 there at least. So I'm looking at probably a minimum of 35 points on secondaries. But Mike also chose to go with Assassination and Cleanse. Now, very, very importantly, on this game, I went first. And there was not enough terrain to hide everything behind. And I did my normal thing. My Kasrkin and my Catachan scout moved off in different directions. and Stormsword open up. I gotta be careful. Stormsword and Storm Surge come up in my mind a lot. Stormsword opens up all the shots. They just go into one Riptide and shred it to bits, and it dies. I'm not particularly surprised by that, but uh, Mike rolls a little bit poorly on his saves, and with each shot that gets through is dealing d6 plus 2, I can, in theory, kill it in 2 shots before the las cannons and bolters even do anything. The other thing is that I move 2 units of Bullgryn, or I take all 3 units of Bullgryn that had been deployed on the line, and I basically beeline them towards my opponent's home objective. With the idea, like, maybe one of them will stay on the middle objective and deploy homers there over and over, but the other 2, at least 12 Bullgryn, are on a mission, and that is to go score a touchdown on the other side of the board. In order to do this, when they move 9 forward, they both move 9, and both of them are able to get into melee range of a Ghost Keel. And I drowned that boy, and I hit that boy with a bat many, many times. And I end up killing both a Riptide and a Ghost Keel on turn 1. Now, my opponent's turn is fairly muted. He does a little bit of damage, and Riptides actually do quite a bit of damage to Bullgryn because the Riptide Ion Accelerator, when you overcharge, does a flat 4 damage, which when you go at -1 is flat 3 damage, which is a really good number for getting into Bullgryn. Because it means that if I make a Feel No Pain, it will live, but if I don't make a Feel No Pain, it's a 6-up Feel No Pain, you just kill a Bullgryn, right? And with 6 shots, you can, in theory, do pretty decent damage into Bullgryn every single turn in exchange for 1 hazardous check. Like, you do that every single time. So Riptide can fairly consistently kill about 2 Bullgryn per turn. But with Assassination and Cleanse, he's only able to get 1 cleanse off by moving one of his Fireside teams down onto the southeast objective and cleanse there. And then it comes back to my turn. I score 10 on Take and Hold at this point because I fail a Battle Shock check in the northwest objective because he's able to shoot at my Kasrkin with, I believe it's a Riptide and some secondary fire from a Storm Surge. But on my next turn, things just get worse. After I finish my movement, I go to Mike and say, "Would you like to rapid ingress anything?" And he goes, "Yes." And he goes in and he brings his Tiger Shark off onto the eastern side of the board. And when he sets it up, I think to myself, I wonder if I can kill it. The answer became very obviously yes, because I ended up taking my Stormsword, and point the big gun, so the main gun and the las cannons, at the Tiger Shark. And I point the heavy bolters at a Riptide. And it just dies. Like, it's not particularly close. I think I get 5 shots through the invul on the Tiger Shark, and yes, it's got a lot of wounds, but if I get 5 through on something with 18 wounds, I'm doing 10 damage before I even have to roll the d6. And so between 5 d6, I'm going to get at least 8 almost every single time. I shoot the first Tiger Shark out of the sky, and it's dead. Other than that, the Catachan in the southeast, they're able to run up and charge the other Ghost Keel that's sitting on the southeast objective, and it takes a lot of damage, but I don't think it fully dies on this turn. I chuck a Melt-A-Mine at the one on the northwest objective, but at this point, Mike is very rapidly running out of things. On his second turn, he scores Take and Hold for his home objective, but he's not able to score a single secondary on this turn. He's not able to get in range of any of my characters, and when he goes to try and cleanse the southeast objective, I remind him that I have 7 OC of Catachan just hanging out on that objective. The other thing that he does on his turn 2 is he brings the Tiger Shark in on the southeast corner as far as it can go and points it directly at my Stormsword. And I got a little bit worried at this point, but then I'm reminded that it can't do anything on the turn that it comes in because it is too big. So, my turn 3 rolls around, and I score 15 on Take and Hold, and I kill every single suit on the board, and every single thing on the board, I believe, except for his Storm Surge. The Callidus, which had deployed a Homer on turn 2, then runs in and kills the sniper. The Stormsword opens up and kills the Tiger Shark out of the air. The Catachan and some Kasrkin go and finish off the sniper team on the southeast objective and kill the Tetras that are over there, and also kill off the Ghost Keel. Oh no, the Bullgryn run in and kill off the Ghost Keel on the southeast objective, and the Riptide on the northwest ends up dying to, I think, Bolter Fire. I think it was Bolter Fire. No, I chuck a grenade, and then Bolter Fire ends up finishing it off on the northwest. So at the bottom of turn 2, he uses it to kill the Callidus for 4 more points, but he's not even holding his home objective at this point because I had moved enough Bullgryn onto the objective that he doesn't even score it. And so he does end up scoring 4 points on assassination. And at that point, he says, "Yeah, it's time to call this one." And I go, "Yeah, I think the only thing worth rolling at this point is let me shoot the Storm Sword at the Storm Surge and see if it dies this turn to see if you get another turn of doing anything." And so I do. I do a fair amount of damage, but I leave it on, I think, 3 wounds again. And then I chuck a grenade with Bullgryn, and it dies. And I max out, bring it down. I'm deploying teleport homers for the rest of the game. I'm controlling 3 objectives for the rest of the game. And this ends up being tied for my most dominant win I've ever had. I remember at the beginning of round 2 rather, I say that my win against Brad and his Tyranids, if we had actually scored it out properly, might have been my most dominant win I'd ever had, which was, again, going up against Eric at There Is Only War GT in Phoenix last year. But this one, I ended up winning with a score of 99 to 21. All my scores the entire game are 1 take and hold objective, 1 assassination proc by killing the Callidus, and 1 cleanse on the southeast objective the entire game. And so I end up winning this one by 78 points, and my opponent concedes by top of turn 4. So, I don't think either Mike nor I were particularly thrilled about that game because not a lot happened, to be honest. I mostly just shot the Stormsword every turn. It killed 1 or 2 things every turn. And if your invulns don't go right, and you don't spike your 4-up invulns, and you lose a Riptide every turn, you don't have a lot of game left as this Tau list. So I end up winning that one 20 to 0, right? Let's see how the rest of the Git posers do. So to start off with, Evan going into Tyranids loses that one pretty bad. It ends up being a 19-1. With Timothy and his Tyranids taking that one. Luis and his Death Guard end up losing to Will and his Custodes 4 to 16. Sage and his Custodes lose to Phil's Death Guard 12 to 8. And then Ryan and his Blood Angels lose to Riley and her Necrons 0 to 20. So, at the end of it, the Git posers end up scoring 33 to Team Zero Comp White's 67. So, overall, Git posers, we end up drawing our first 3 rounds and losing our last 2. But that's not where the story ends. Now, because as a team, we didn't do particularly well, we end up getting an end result of 31st out of 38 teams. Well, 39 when you include the judge team that shows up in case someone needs opponents to play against. Which is very close to about where I was expecting us to do. I had listed us as probably getting 30th out of 38, so we did about what we were expecting. However, the thing that makes me feel particularly good about myself is the fact that I was the #1 scoring player in the entire tournament. Over 5 rounds, a little bit fraudulently because I ended up getting a 20-0 in round 1 because my opponent wasn't there, and I got a forfeit there. I ended up scoring 89 points in the WTC format over 5 rounds, and that's a lot. Now, the thing that makes me feel really good, and my entirely unfounded claim that I'm going to, put up on my wall at some point, I'm going to print it out and frame it, is Remember how at the very beginning of the day we were talking about the very strong players that were there? One of them was Ben Urich from Smite Club, who was also playing guard. And Ben ended up scoring 88 battle points, meaning that I was not only the number one scoring player in the entire tournament, but I also beat the arguably one of the, I mean, definitely a hyperly one of the best players in the world by 1 point, which feels good. It doesn't mean anything at all, but it's the one time I might ever be able to say, "Ha, I outplaced Ben Urich in something." But anyway, it's just one of those cool things that's happening. Yeah, overall, closing thoughts. I've been really enjoying this list. Playing with a super heavy is not something that I had really ever expected to do particularly often, but seeing how light a lot of the terrain was at this event meant that I felt very comfortable playing a super heavy because not a lot of armies can deal with it. Not a lot of armies can deal with the number of 4-up saves, toughness 6 bodies that I'm going to be presenting. Not a lot of armies can deal with a 2,400 point list because I'm consistently bringing back Kasrkin and Catachan. And it just creates a situation where I stat check a lot of armies, and armies that I can't stat check, I still have enough just units that are difficult to remove that become good scoring pieces. And it means that I can score pretty well in basically any situation. So even if I lose, I shouldn't be losing by a lot. And in fact, since I started playing this list, the biggest loss that I've had was I lost by 22 points, where I scored 73 to 95 up against Ahmed and his Custodes at the GMI RTT that I made 2 videos ago. But other than that, I have been keeping games very close. I lost by 5 to Camden and his Eldar. I lost by 6 to Steven and his Tyranids. And that's about... Oh, I lost by 15 to Tyler and his Orcs. But it's been a list that has been quite performing quite well for me. However, I'm probably going to stop playing this list after this event because I know a lot of events around here are planning to switch over to Games Workshop terrain, and the Stormsword doesn't fit on most of them. You got to play something else. So I'm going to be looking at different options. Like I pointed out in the past, I have a bunch of Rogaldorns and Manticores and a Basilisk. How do I point? There we go. Over in here that I'm going to be planning to pivot to in the near future, so you will get to see a lot of that coming through relatively soon. I'm also planning to try out... Where are they? I got a bunch of Rough Riders here that I'm planning to give a try. So you'll be seeing those in some battle reports. Probably the next RTT that I go to, if it's on Games Workshop terrain, I'm going to be giving them a try again and crossing my fingers that they end up doing what I need them to. Other than that, again, I want to give a thank you to GitHammer. It's been interesting. So I do want to preface this with the fact that I really enjoyed playing with the GitHammer guys. The Discord and all the people in there are great. But I have had 3 different people ask if I'm interested in playing with them at a future Teams event. And I know there's a lot of great teams out there. I know there's a lot of teams that I would enjoy playing with. And I'm probably going to be trying to play with a team that I can probably play on some higher tables with, looking for more competitive games. Because even though I had a great time, I ended up winning all 4 of the games I actually played. Only one of them was particularly close. Only one of them did it feel like I really had to spend all 5 turns thinking. One of them I blew out in 2 turns. One of them was just a slog where like my opponent couldn't really do anything because I was always playing peekaboo with his Vindicators. One of them, my opponent was tabled by the end of turn 4. So I only had one game that I actually played all 5 turns in. Okay, I only played one game that I played all 5 turns where I had to make significant decisions every single turn. And I'm hoping to be able to do that in more games, which is going to be one of the big driving forces. We'll talk more about what teams I'll potentially be playing with in the future, but I definitely enjoyed my time with GitHammer. If people ask me to come back, definitely going to be looking at everything that's going on there. So to close out, let's talk a little bit about other future plans. Like I said, this was kind of the culmination of the last couple of weeks, and then after that, I do have a couple of RTTs on the horizon. This upcoming weekend, I have the Loaded Dice RTT on March, or not this next weekend, 2 weekends from now, the Loaded Dice RTT over towards Santa Clarita, and the Get Hammer Mork Madness RTT that is in Cypress, California, and I'll go to one or both of those, depending on how my work schedule ends up shaking out. And then I also have the Game Ogre RTT on March 30th that I'm currently signed up for out in Westlake Village, which is pretty far west of me. Does that make sense? West? I think that was west for you guys on screen. Um, but those are the current things I'm planning to go to. I'm looking at whether or not I will be able to go to the Palm Springs Open as a GT in, I believe that one's August, I want to say. And any other GTs that I am able to go to, I will try and make it out for. So, yeah, I guess the big things here are, I think I've said it before, my two major goals this year are, one, I know people don't care about it, but I want to have at least 1,000 points in the ITC ladder at the end. I ended this last, I want to say split because I'm too League of Legends build. I ended the 2023 ITC season with 876 ITC points. And the other thing I want to do is I want to go undefeated at a GT. I don't exactly care how that works out. If I go, if I get a bunch of draws, so be it. I'm still trying to decide if I want to count this last event, this California Team Championships, as going undefeated at a GT, because I did have 5 rounds and I won all of them, but it was with people trying to get me into good matchups and also with one forfeit. So, I will ponder that in the meantime, but it like half counts in my mind, if that makes sense. But with all that said, thank you to everybody who has been watching. I know this one has been a little bit longer, but it's because it was a Teams event. There's a little bit more to talk about for sure. And I will see you guys all in the next video.